the science.
Life is the blood of 1,000 men and women was spilled in these walls. Limbs twisted and broken, iron gouts from bloody sockets, flesh burned black.
Please. Await the dead. In death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, no mishaps, and no schemes. What you have to realize is that we're all just a mouse that a cat has by the tail.
The number you have reached, 911, has been changed to a non-published number.
Warning, the following show contains conservative posturing, radical Christian ideas, and may offend pagans, Wiccans, Islamic fundamentalists, and other unenlightened individuals. Callers and guests may be subjected to brash and offensive comments by the hosts and any other type of bullying tactics available. But that's okay. We know why you're here.
This concludes this test of the emergency broadcast system.
Tonight is Monday, March 26th, 2007.
Hello and welcome to World of the Unexplained. Sorry we're running a little late tonight, guys, but as usual, I'm Jay Scott.
And also, as usual, but not always, I'm Trent Lackey.
Depends on the mood he's in.
Yeah, that's true.
Tonight we have a very special World of the Unexplained. Tonight we have Dr. Raymond Moody. He is the father of near-death experience research. I believe he coined the phrase near-death experience, or NDE. He has been featured on NBC Today, ABC's Turning Point, Donahue, Sally Jesse Raphael, Geraldo, MSNBC. He's also got a lot of degrees he's accumulated over the years. His MD from Medical College of Georgia, PhD in philosophy, as well as an MA in philosophy, and a BA with honors in philosophy, all from UVA. He's a lecturer. He's an author. You've probably heard of his book, Life After Life, a wonderful book. If you haven't heard of it, well, please go by and pick up a copy of it. It's probably one of the foremost best-selling books on NDE research. So without further ado, Dr. Raymond Moody, thank you for being our guest tonight on World of the Unexplained. How are you, sir?
Well, I'm doing great, Jay, and thank you so much for having me on the show.
It is truly
Excellent.
our pleasure. We were really shocked when you said you would come on. So.
Indeed.
But so tell us about. I've read the book, and you wrote this book a long time ago, didn't you? Life After Life.
I actually did. I wrote it in 1974 after I had been studying near-death experiences. About 12 years, I suppose. The first I ever came across this was as an undergraduate student of philosophy at UVA, and immediately got taken as a first-year student there by Plato's writings.
Yes.
And as you probably know, at the very end of the Plato's Republic, there's a story of a man who was believed dead on the battlefield, but just as the funeral was getting ready to start, he sat up on the funeral pyre and told of his experience going to the other side. And about 3 years later at the University of Virginia, I met an actual living human being, Dr. George Ritchie, who was a professor of psychiatry.
I want to talk to you about this man. I have been trying to get him on my show. He says he no longer does radio interviews, but he wrote a wonderful book years ago that few people know of, and I can't remember the name of it. Something Tomorrow is in the title.
Order to Return is
that was
the name of it.
That was the newest one. It was Return from Tomorrow. Was that the first one?
Right, Return from Tomorrow was the first one.
And wasn't that a fabulous book?
Well, it is, Jay, and you can understand how in 1965, at the age of, I was just 20 then, and I first heard him tell that at the University of Virginia, and it really, really was a formative event in my life.
Now, has he changed his viewpoints in order to return?
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, many writers will know that sometimes when you do a contract with a publisher, you get saddled with an editor that you're not quite pleased with the product. And his first book, Return from Tomorrow, George, he felt that his words didn't come across truly in that one. So some years later, Hampton Roads did a better version of it called Order to Return. Okay. And so I think that's the one that George kind of likes the best, and it's exactly the story as I remember it from back in 1965.
Okay, well, now I know, I saw a guy play you in a movie. I want to mention this too, Dr. Moody. It was a movie about the life of Dan and Brinkley.
Yep.
And I don't remember what the name of the film was called, but I did see the guy that played you in the film as a younger man, doing the research and meeting with him. How was meeting him? Was that did they portray that realistically in the film?
Oh, absolutely not. Anybody else who's ever been involved in having some story about them put in a drama, of course, I guess has the same experience. But that was just nothing like the reality of the event. So,
well, I'm sorry that I've got the train of thought all mixed up and all over the place. I just had to throw those out there.
That's all right. But
that's typical.
But in fact, that was really what set me on the course of studying this was that meeting with George Ritchie in 1965, and then I finished my PhD in philosophy there at UVA, and actually shortly after I began teaching down in Greenville at East Carolina University, one of my own students one day, in response to reading the works of Plato in the course that I was teaching, came up after class and said that he had wanted to talk about the question of life after death. And I said, well, why do you want to talk about that? And he said that about a year ago that this young man who was actually very badly injured in this accident and had visible scars and so on, as he was talking with me, said that about a year ago he had been in this accident and his doctors said he died. And to quote him, he said, I had an experience that has totally changed my life, but I haven't had anybody to talk about it with.
Wow.
So, and I was really just astonished that what I heard from that young man that day, which was late 69 or early 70, pretty much exactly matched what I had heard from George Ritchie 4 years before. So that was really... that made me realize at that point that this had to be a fairly common experience because there was essentially no chance that I would run into the only two of these there are in a 4-year period without even looking for it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That really is amazing. So this is when you started compiling this information for this book, your first book, Life After Life?
Yeah, that's right. Along about that time was when I started gathering a lot of cases because anybody who... researches this will tell you that as soon as you are known for having a sympathetic point of view about this, people will approach you and tell you these stories because it's hard to imagine now, but back in the late 60s and early 70s, there were a lot of these experiences, as I quickly found, but people were just very reluctant to talk about them. A lot of people felt that they were probably the only person who had ever had such an experience. So it wasn't really until I gathered quite a large number of cases and came out with this book that then all the... by then it was pretty evident that anybody who... researched this in the sense of sincerely started looking for cases, we're going to find them because, with the development of this cardiopulmonary resuscitation technique, a lot of people were having these experiences.
Now, and you talk about in your book that there's all these stages that occur when one dies, and they're shared in general. I guess if you want to make a generalization, you've basically got the beginning to the end before they're revived. And I want to get into those stages with you here in just a second. But first, let me ask you a question. I know that you started out as a Methodist. At least you talk about that in your book. Has this research changed your religious beliefs at all?
Well, actually, Jay, to be, it would have been kind of boring in Life After Life to tell the whole elaborate story piece by piece. But Actually, my religious background was pretty complex. My dad was a surgeon, number one, and number two, a military officer. And if you know a little bit about the personalities associated with both of those professions, you can kind of imagine. And that's what my dad was like, a double dose of this, what we call the no-nonsense. And Dad he was not a religious person. But as we both know, being from down south, and first thing a lot of people want to know down south is, what are you? Which means, of course, your denomination. So what my dad used to say when people would ask him that question is he would say, "Oh, we're Presbyterian." But really the fact is we never did go to church until I got to be about 12 years old. And for some reason, well, actually it makes more sense now, but at the time it really just didn't make any sense to me. But my father, who was then about 38 years old, started suddenly dragging us to church. Well, fortunately for me, it didn't last very long. Okay. But and in retrospect, I can see very clearly that it was Dad's midlife crisis, and often in that situation, people then try to start, looking into that aspect of life. But I had been an amateur astronomer since the age of 8, and I just grew up assuming that when you die, that there's a wipe out of the consciousness, and that it wasn't in my background or general belief system to think that there was a life after death. And in terms of the Methodist thing, at the time that I wrote that book, I was my wife had been Methodist, so I was temporarily going to the Methodist Church at that time. But I'm not really. I just I am a God-loving person. I have a relationship with God, but I don't really subscribe to any particular denomination.
Okay, fair enough. What exactly? Let's get in before we get to our first break. It's 8 minutes away. Let's get into these stages that people go through. What can you tell our listeners about what happens, or what the general the general experience is for someone when they first realize, I'm dead?
Yeah. Well, all over the world, really, we get a very similar picture where people relate this as a sort of travel narrative. They say that at the point where their heart stops beating, that they say that they actually leave their physical bodies and they get out of their bodies, and from their point of view, they say that they are hovering above the body, their physical body, on the operating table or at the scene of an accident or whatever, and that from this perspective they can see and understand very well what's going on down below. They say that they actually understand the words that are the communications that are passing between the doctor and nurse. For example, it's not generally that they say that they actually hear a voice, but rather that they become immediately aware of what the doctor and nurses are trying to communicate with one another. As one woman told me, she said, I became aware of what the doctor was about to say the moment before he would open his mouth to say it.
Wow.
And in this situation, they tell us that even though they are able to understand and see perfectly what's down below, what's going on in this resuscitation, no one seems to be able to hear or to see them, because if they try to ask the doctor, how can it be that I'm out of my body up here looking at you down there, that no one seems to be able to hear them? If they try to touch someone to get their attention, they find they go right through. So they are in this situation of being unable to communicate. And in this situation at some point, often when they seem to realize that this has something to do with the dying process, they begin to open out into a part of this experience that they say, no matter how eloquent they happen to be, no matter how many languages they speak, no matter how well educated they may be, people pretty much all over the world say the same thing, that they enter into a state of consciousness that they just can't put into words. They say this really lies beyond our ability to put it into the words and languages that we have.
It's utterly ineffable.
That's right, ineffable.
That's amazing.
Say at this point that they become aware of a passageway. They say they'll just try to use the best words they can, and they become aware of a passageway of some sort, and go through this passageway and come out on the other side into a very warm and loving light, a presence or a being of light that permeates everything. And as they go into this light, they say they feel complete compassion, peace, love, joy, and in that situation of illumination and light often tell us that relatives or friends of theirs who have already passed on seem to be there to meet them, to sort of smooth them through this transition. And at some point in this, all the rest of this environment seems to disappear, and they are surrounded by a full-color, moving panorama, which is three-dimensional and is displayed all around them. And they say that it reflects every single action that they have ever done in their lives. And that...
Including the bad ones?
Oh, yes, the bad
great.
and the good is all there, right side by side.
Wonderful.
Often in the presence of a very loving being who sort of guides them through this panorama. And most remarkably in this review, as it were, people say, number one, that even though they have to describe it as a sequence because our language by nature is sequential, that in the experiencing of it, it wasn't a sequence at all, that everything was there simultaneously or all at once. And furthermore, they say that as you see each action of your life in that review and you reflect on it, you do not relive it from the perspective you had when you were actually doing the action.
Okay.
But rather, you are the receiver of the action. That is, it's as though you inhabit the consciousness of those with whom you have interacted. And so if you see yourself doing a kind-hearted or loving action to someone else, then you feel the good feelings you brought about. Or if you see yourself doing a mean-spirited or harmful action to someone else, you feel the bad feelings that you brought about.
So all of these things, they're not really sequential. They're kind of flooding you all at one time.
Absolutely. As this friend of mine, Vi Horton, told me years ago, she said, Raymond, you could say that my experience took 1 second, or you could say that it took 10,000 years. And she said, and it wouldn't make a bit of difference which way you said it. Huh. And I've heard that same sentiment expressed many times from many different people, that this experience is timeless, that it takes place outside the framework of time as you and I experience it, and also outside of the framework of space as you and I experience it. The spatial relationships are all changed around too in very interesting ways.
Now, so did this research and speaking with all these people, interviewing all these people, did this lead you to believe in life after life?
Well, you know something, I got to say this, Jay. It's so I was earlier asking you about your education in law and how you're on the way to becoming an attorney, and the reason I was bringing that up is that actually I think that the kind of reasoning that I think you have to get into to talk about beliefs about life after death is something that probably only an attorney can grasp, or else a person who's trained in logic and philosophy, because I assure you, you're going to understand this, but I think many people won't. And that is that I honestly think and this is how I've always looked at it. I mean, I studied logic, and I got my PhD in philosophy before I went to medical school.
I would have went to medical school, but, lawyers don't do math in public.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And so you'll understand what I mean is that I honestly do think that if we look at these kinds of experiences as, quote, evidence of life after death, and especially, quote, scientific evidence, unquote, of life after death, we're just barking up the wrong tree. That thus far in human history, I don't think there is any real way that we can use the logic we have to build a rational case that there is a life after death. And I think there's a very fundamental reason, and that is that the logic that we have is predicated, as you know, on literal meaning, that it was developed by Aristotle, and when he did it, he predicated it on literal assertions that are either true or false. Uh-huh. But that when we deal with a question like life after death, we are dealing with something that is outside the framework entirely of literal true or false assertions, that we're really just dealing with a different domain of language. So I can honestly tell you that I really can't draw a conclusion either way. I don't think that the reason of of 2007, the rational code we have, really enables us to draw a conclusion about this. But I don't think of that as anything bad, because it's not too surprising that the most important question of existence would be kind of outside of the framework of reason. Yeah, it's a very important question, but I think that the real breakthrough in understanding life after death is not going to come from scientific quarters. I think it will be in the way of coming up with some entirely fresh, rational way of thinking about these things. David Hume, the great philosopher who helped us understand the notion of causation, and whose philosophical thought had a lot to do with the modern scientific notions of causation, for example, and induction. And Hume very brilliantly, I think, pointed out that, as he said, by the mere light of reason, it seems difficult to prove the immortality of the soul. Some new species of logic is required for that purpose, he said, and some new faculties of the mind that they may enable us to comprehend that logic. And the exciting part of what Hume is saying there to me is that what that means is that to comprehend the question of life after death rationally, we're going to actually have to expand our own minds and come up with a whole new framework of rational thinking. And that's why, to me, this question of life after death is so exciting and interesting.
No, you have a new book coming out soon. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, I do, actually, yes. Jay, and I would actually love to send you that to take a look at. It's
great.
What it is, it tries to solve that exact problem. I've tried to work out a whole new system of rational thinking in which the question of life after death takes on an entirely different demeanor, as it were, or entirely different complexion, from which I think there can be whole new kinds of studies done to study near-death experiences. For example, we were talking earlier about the ineffability that people who have these near-death experiences, no matter how eloquent or well-educated they may be, when they come back from the experience, they tell us that there are no words, and such words as they can give us seem to contradict themselves in some very deep and fundamental way. If you think about it, when somebody says, well, I had this experience in which I just can't put it into words, I just can't describe it to you, but that the best I can get to it is saying that it was not in time and space, that it was not in the framework of time-space as you and I understand it, and yet the way they do try to put it into words is to say, I got out of my body, I went through a tunnel into a light, I saw my life pass in review, I returned to my body and came back to life. Well, that's a travel narrative, and yet the very precondition of the narrative is that it's not spatial or temporal. So what sense can there be of traveling in that sense in a framework where there's no time and space? I mean, if you see what I'm getting at, this is just a very, very difficult question. And so what I'm projecting here, what I conjecture is that we can change that.
Okay.
That when enough people learn to reformat their minds, actually to think in an entirely new way, using a new kind of logic about this important question of life after death. And when they do that just as a matter of curiosity and to expand their own minds, well, let's say we get 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or hope as many people ultimately as will go through this process, then the clock starts, and we know that just by chance, as years go by, some of these people are going to have near-death experiences. Now, what I am confident in conjecturing is that the people who go into their future near-death experiences already having this new kind of logic in their mind are then going to be able to come back and to tell us in a whole new way
what this experience
is like.
Yeah.
So that what we're going to be doing here, you see, is to overcome the ineffability barrier.
That's quite a goal.
I agree.
It is. We're going to have to take a short break, Dr. Moody. Hang tight with us. Guys, we're going to open up the phone lines, too, 877-722-7382. That's 877-SCARE-YOU-2, toll-free in the United States and Canada, or locally 336-996-1596. You're listening to World of the Unexplained, and we'll be right back after this.
And we're back. Dr. Raymond Moody tonight here on World of the Unexplained. Guys, the phone numbers are 1-877-722-7382. That is 1-877-SCARE-YOU-2. And ooh, that's pretty scary. Local number is 336-996-1596. And don't forget to hop in the chat room if you're phone shy to ask a question there. But
I just got back in the chat room here. There's a couple people, not as many as we usually have. Okay. I'm surprised.
But we prefer you guys to call.
Do you know we had like 690 hits yesterday?
For what?
Usually before the show they're looking to see who the guest is, and so we had 690 people come to our website yesterday about this.
That's crazy, Scott.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Well,
anyway,
I don't know. Philosophy was never really my bag, but I'm gonna try to take a stab at this.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 19, whatever D. Anyway, this whole notion of once they have the near-death experience and they can't put this experience into words, and then also they see their life flashing before their eyes, but it's all simultaneous. You say it's non-temporal, it's non-spatial. Do you think that has a lot to do with the fact that, basically they are separated from the material realm? You know what I'm saying? Like, they can't really describe anything because they don't have any physical reference point to use. I don't know. I don't really know where I'm going with that, but I mean... Well,
exactly, and I feel your confusion because I'm confused about it, too. What does that mean? That is a really... and we might very well imagine that if there were some... Let's hypothesize for a moment that there is some other framework of existence or other state of being which these people somehow gain access to during this... time of the close call, it would make a lot of sense that they wouldn't be able to put it into words. I think that's sort of the sense I get of what you're talking about. I mean, it wouldn't be at all surprising that if there is some sort of life after death, that someone who had gotten a glimpse of it would have a hard time putting it into words. If you've ever seen those drawings by M.C. Escher, the Dutch graphic artist,
right.
he draws buildings, for example, in which, like a mill, and you see the water wheel of this grist mill, and the water wheel is the water is coming down over the wheel from a trough.
Uh-huh.
And it's falling from above on the trough, and then you follow the water from the bottom of the water wheel, and it seems to go down one trough and down another, turn a right angle, and then down another trough, and then turn another right angle, and then down another trough, and then another turn, and down another right angle, and it's up above again. And if you look at that surface that Escher drew as a two-dimensional object, you can describe all those lines there and all the shadings of the drawing, and that makes perfect sense. However, if you try to describe that drawing as though it were a three-dimensional scene, it becomes nonsense. That water can't go up, can't go down, 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 and then be back up again. And so what I'm getting at here is that it's kind of like I understood you to be hinting at there, Trent. It's not at all surprising that if somebody does come back from a state, which is the afterlife state, then the story that they give would probably be, from our point of view, pretty garbled and hard to understand.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that most of these people have the same experiences, though, in general. Now, we had talked earlier, and it's something that I wanted to touch on. We had talked about Dr. George Ritchie
Yes.
and how you had met him, and that spurred your interest in this phenomenon. Now, Dr. Ritchie, I remember in his first book, he talked about being in the military, having this bronchial condition that ended up causing him to be dead for so many minutes. And he described this. He described meeting Jesus Christ, and Jesus came to him and showed him the levels of heaven and hell and all sorts of stuff. Now, has this notion changed in the new book that's published by Hampton Roads?
Oh no, not at all. Not that part of it. I think George just felt that the second version was a little more detailed and more in line with how he personally relates it. But no, that part of it hasn't changed at all. And I should put in a broader context there is that I've heard these experiences from people all over the world. And being an American from the South, you can imagine that the preponderance of people I've talked with over the years being since they are Southerners and Americans, have generally
God bless America. Go ahead, Raymond. I'm sorry.
have generally been of the Christian faith,
right.
And what they tend to say is that yes, in this experience, they see Christ. However, people from other traditions, Judaism, for example, or even people from the East, will say these same things, that they experience a loving personal presence of complete compassion and love. And one thing I hear from people, even the people I'm talking about who came into this from the perspective of the Christian faith, that they say that they learned from their experience, in effect, that denomination doesn't count, and that
and the Baptists think they're the only ones that's going, oh my God, no, go ahead.
that in fact there's I think that what you see coming out of this is a feeling on the part of people who go through this that there certainly is a life after death, but that it's very far beyond our ability really to explain it or to comprehend it, and that not only that, it's also beyond the province of any one religious tradition.
Now, usually I would nail my guest to the wall on this, but you're I'm not going to do that. You're a nice guy. We do Christian conservative paranormal talk a lot of times, and so that's why this makes this show weird and different from everyone else in the market, all the liberalism that's spread rampantly. I'm not going to even get into that, though. But, Dr. Moody, I am curious, has anyone ever come to you and said, you know what, I had a terrible experience?
Oh man, I was going to ask that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
but
that's all right.
the fires and brimstone. Has anyone ever come to you?
Did they ever meet the devil?
I have heard a very small number of those, and I'll just tell you, Trent, I have no idea what to make of that. I mean, you just don't know what to say. I will say this, that the best systematic studies of the unpleasant or hellish near-death experiences seem to suggest that they're quite rare, and also that they are less homogeneous than the kinds of experiences I talked about earlier, in the sense that the unpleasant experiences seem to fall into three major categories, according to the best study that's been done on this, and that I don't remember the first two categories, but that the last and rarest category has been those in which people say that they see hellish imagery or flames or so on. And I believe that this was pretty much borne out on the survey that George Gallup did of this, and I believe around 1979 or 80, in which in his survey too, the number of people who reported these unpleasant experiences was quite small compared to the other more pleasant ones. But how do you know what to make about something? Make of something like that? Really, I mean, we're into a framework here, as I was saying earlier, where we just really don't have the logical techniques or principles to make sense of this. For example, why, if these near-death experiences are, for example, a glimpse of eternity, which we just don't know. We just don't know. There's probably no way of determining that either way. But if they are, why would only, say, 30% of the people who have a cardiac arrest under these circumstances report such experiences? I mean, we really just don't know.
Well, I mean, also, since there's no real sense of time, there's no way to determine what portion of the experience maybe person A had versus person B. Even though they may share similar experiences, maybe the hellish things were seen by a person who, in fact, had a longer period of time in it, whereas somebody else had a shorter period of time, whereas somebody else, there's no way to measure it, so you really have no, there's nothing you can really point to as hard data.
No quantifiable determinants.
And I don't know, maybe that has something to do with it too, and I know, like I said, it's a very lofty goal that you're trying to achieve by, and I don't think it's not, I do think it's possible, but the question, the problem is going to be getting enough people to know about it and to change their thinking to where they're going to be able to, basically you're playing the lottery here. Hopefully the right person's going to have the experience that's going to be able to think in this way to come back and be able to explain it to you.
That's right, and it very much depends, therefore, on the degree to which this knowledge becomes, the degree to which this becomes public knowledge. And which, the fortunate thing about this, is that I have a long time scale I'm working with, because this work is it's a kind of self-conducting study, which presumably could go on even after I die, that presumably people will still be reading this book and hopefully reformatting their minds, and eventually I think it's going to work.
I think there's another portion that's kind of I mean, when somebody goes through a near-death experience, that's pretty traumatic, and it's sort of like, even if they had the logical training or they tried to, set up their minds, okay, if this happens to me, then I'm going to do A, B, and C. Well, you don't know what you're going to do whenever you smash into a tree or something and have a near-death experience.
Which is not, it's not that kind of thing where they've got to be rehearsing these things to say or think or whatever. What it is, and it's not specifically geared to the question of life after death, but just generally to sort of restructure the way that people think in a general way, not in this way in specific. But you know what I think we should do? I'm going to send this to you, and if with your permission, and let you take a look through it, and see what you think. My colleagues anyway think I'm onto something here. So.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'd love to. I'll send you an email after the show. Actually, I think you have my address anyway. But
I do. Yeah, great.
So. But that's a good thought though. That this new logic, this new idea to be able to explain these things better. I was going somewhere with some. Oh yeah. So the cases. I want to come back to Dr. Ritchie for just a second, Dr. Moody. In his book, the way he explains it, do you have a lot of people that explain it that way as well? But I guess like what I'm trying to say is the majority of people really don't see it that way. The majority of people just have this collective general type of experience with the tunnel and the light and the panorama, and then I guess they're just sucked back out. But let me ask you a question. I don't know a lot about medicine. I'm not a doctor. If I were, I would be practicing plastic surgery because that's where my true spirit feels happy.
Yeah.
Is there something maybe organic that, I understand that, in the law, we say, well, here, when the heart stops, or depending on the state you're in, when there's a cessation in brain function, brain activity. In these cases that you've researched, are these people brain dead, or could these things that they're seeing be like the brain shutting down and the part of the body still alive to experience these things, and maybe it's going...
Actually, I think we have two different questions here, and they're both of them very important.
Okay.
The first question is, were any of these people really dead? And the answer to that is no. Because by definition, if somebody gets back, they weren't dead.
True.
Now, because death is by definition the state you don't return from.
Yeah.
Now, then the other thing you mentioned there was the brainwave determination, and this is highly ambiguous. Now, here we get into something which is accurate, but nonetheless exceedingly strange. I really don't know what to think about this information I'm going to share with you next, and that is that I don't know if you might have heard of this case of the woman Pam Reynolds from Atlanta, who probably about 10 years ago, or 15 or so, was then in her early 30s, and was found to have an inoperable brain aneurysm. That is, it was an outpocketing in the artery, or a weakness like a balloon in the artery.
Okay.
That was in her brain at such a point that had the surgeons gone in to operate, it would have burst and she would have died on the table. But the family just would not hear of this, that it was inoperable. So they made inquiries, and they found in Phoenix a surgical team that was doing a radical new procedure. So they took Pam out to Phoenix, flew her out there, and they did the following procedure to her. They put her on a operating table that could be elevated at the head, and then they began to cool Pam's body until she became severely hypothermic.
Okay.
And at that point, they stopped her heartbeat, and they elevated the head of the surgical bed, and they drained all the blood from her head.
Wow.
Huh.
Now,
Whoa.
as you can imagine, now incidentally, throughout this procedure, she was monitored by equipment which determined that not only did she have no brain waves as you think of in the cerebrum or the upper brain function.
Dr. Moody, I hate to cut you off here.
No, that's okay.
But we've got 1 minute, and then we're gonna. I'm just gonna go ahead and if you would please keep that thought. And the only reason I'm saying that's the stations that do run us. They run the news and weather at the top of the hour
So
for
we
5
have to
minutes.
be-
So
have to be off.
I don't want anybody to miss this story because it's very good. So with that said, guys, call in. I don't know where you're at tonight. So, guys in the chat room, if you want to, call in. I know you're listening because no one's chatting. Everyone's just sitting there in awe of Dr. Raymond Moody. I think that's what it is. I think they're frightened. They're a little, what's the word I'm looking for?
Overwhelmed.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think they're a little intimidated too.
Yeah.
Anyway, don't be scared, guys. Call in 877-SCARE-YOU-TOO. We'll be right back with Dr. Raymond Moody here on World of the Unexplained right after. And we're back on World of the Unexplained. Tonight our guest is the distinguished Dr. Raymond Moody. Please give us a call here, 877-722-7382. That number again is 877-SCARE-YOU-TOO. Also locally, 336-996-1596. Everybody in the chat room's kind of quiet tonight. So anyway, I want to plug something real quick, Dr. Moody, if you don't mind. We're doing a Out of Darkness tour in Greensboro, North Carolina, June the 9th, 2007. We will have with us Dr. Al Prophet, speaking about some of the wonderful ghost footage that he's captured that really, really freaked me out.
Yes.
Also,
pretty amazing.
Also, John Zaffis is going to be there. We all know him from TLC, the Discovery Channel, The Haunting Show. I can't remember which channel that's on, Travel or
Travel,
Discovery or one of those. John Zaffis, I can't really say he's an exorcist because he doesn't perform the exorcisms himself, but he uses priests to do that. And John is the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren from the Amityville horror fame. He's going to be there with us, as well as myself and the Wotu crew. Give it up, guys. Laura Moon from Full Moon Radio will be there, as well as author Terry Bain, author of Actual Factual Dracula, which I saw the print of this, the cover, the back cover, with my name on it. She used my quote for the blurb on the back of her book. I was really honored. That's my first book blurb. Yeah. so
I think this book is really neat.
Did I miss anybody? Bill Schneblin. Gosh,
oh
I
my
can't
gosh.
believe the ex-vampire himself.
Yeah.
Bill Sneblin's going to be there as well. So, guys, check that out. We're giving free tickets away to that event. All you have to do is go to your email. Email us worldoftheunexplained at Gmail, G for Google, gmail.com, and, put in the subject line, Out of Darkness Tour, free ticket giveaway, something to that effect, and let us know that you want to register for our free ticket drawing, which we'll be having at some point in time. The cutoff date for these is April the 30th, and we've got to sell at least 25 tickets, otherwise the event is canceled. $50 for the whole day, $75 if you want to hang out with us after and have dinner and drinks. Anyway, so we're going to go from there back to Dr. Moody. Sorry about that long self-promotional plug. But so we were talking about the lady that went in for the surgery. They elevated her head. All the blood came out, and that's about where I remember us leaving off.
Yes, her body was very hypothermic. They stopped her heart. They elevated her head. They drained all the blood from her head. And that point, you can see that there was no more pressure in the arterial tree, so they could safely make an incision and go inside her head and take out the aneurysm without it collapsing. Well, all during this period in which the surgery was going on, there was no brainwave activity, not just in the cerebral hemispheres, but even in the brainstem was silent. So, in terms of the question you were raising about the flat brain waves, I mean, was she dead or wasn't she? And of course the answer is she wasn't, because she came back. But nonetheless, by many of the standard tests during that time that people used to decide death, Pam Reynolds was dead. And yet during this period, she got out of her body. She saw the surgeons operating on her. She went, from her point of view, into another realm and had this review of her life and was brought back down this tunnel by an uncle who had passed away. Now, what do you make of something like that? And I give up. I give up.
What year was this, Dr. Prophet? I'm sorry, I'm reading. Gosh, Dr. Moody. Excuse me. That's what happens when you try to multitask too many things at one time. Go ahead.
This was some years ago. I can't remember, but
so it wasn't recent. It was back in.
It was within the last 15 years or so. Something like that.
That's amazing.
That's a pretty amazing technique.
And she came back and she survived this thing and lived to tell about the experience.
Yes, indeed, she did, and was a very vivacious person, as a matter of fact. And really what this gets down to is the question you were raising earlier about, you said that you're not really a doctor, but that you have the feeling, that you raised the question, could this be some sort of effect of the dying brain? In other words, the oxygen deprivation of the brain and so on. And really, to me, even though I'm familiar with a lot of the work that's been done on the brain, and of course, as a psychiatrist and medical doctor, this is fascinating stuff to me.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm also a former philosophy professor, and I think the deeper question here is not a medical or a scientific question, and that's the philosophical question of how, in the name of God, is the consciousness that we experience inwardly, how is that connected to the material substance of the brain? And in reality, nobody knows that. That is really one of the deep philosophical mysteries of existence, I think. That's the real question. And some people people who really they're rushing through their scientific education, they don't have time to think of all these profound philosophical dilemmas. So it's very easy for people in medicine or who study neurosciences, for example, to say that, well, since we know so much about the brain, then therefore we can go over from that information and explain the nature of consciousness. I just don't think so. I think there's still a very, very big gap. And a lot of people in the physiological side of things seem to believe in what's called epiphenomenalism, which is the idea that there isn't any independent reality to consciousness as such. That is just a secondary artifact of the primary process, which is the chemical and electrical activity going on in the brain. But how in the world do you know something like that? I mean, You can't get out of the situation to know either way. So, it's an insoluble dilemma.
This is totally a random tangent, but just from what we're talking about here, I'm kind of curious, in your opinion, was Terry Schiavo actually dead? Or what?
I don't know. I think the confusing thing about that question is more a matter of what you mean by dead.
Oh.
Yeah, I just don't know. I just don't know.
These philosophy people.
Let me say this is not in relation to the Terry Schiavo case, which was a different kind of case. In the cases that I'm thinking of, there was no real central destruction of the neural tissue as we found in the Terry Schiavo case. But I've known of a number of cases where I was involved with people where they were clearly comatose and where we assumed that they would never regain consciousness again. And certainly we assumed that they couldn't possibly be picking up anything that we were saying at the bedside or other people were saying. And yet sometimes months later these people revived and actually say that they were aware of what was going on at the bedside. Now, that is something I've seen and I just don't question because I've seen it myself. And what does that mean? I just don't know. I mean, I think that for anybody really to think that they have solved the really enormous questions about consciousness and the mind just because they have some degree in any field, to me that's really extremely egomaniacal.
Oh yeah, very true. I don't know. I mean, that's a very interesting concept. I mean, people who are in that situation, you know, and they don't seem to be conscious. So where is their consciousness? You know,
D just passed me a note that says Rich Anders has.
Oh well, yeah.
It's a guest of ours.
Anyway,
that
I mean,
listens to our show.
you know, where is their conscious? You know, if they don't appear conscious and they don't seem to be reacting to outside stimulus, and where is it? You know.
Yep.
Anyway, that's really kind of heavy.
There's another really bizarre phenomenon, and I'm sure that any people listening, you know, I mean, this is just so common that if you mention this to 100 people, you're bound to have a number of them in there who've seen this for themselves, and that is that someone can be apparently passing away and going downhill with some terminal illness. They get worse and worse and worse, and finally they seem to slip over into a state of obtundation. That is, I mean, that everybody around just assumes we'll never see Grandma or whoever again, that she's just passed on. And everybody wonders, well, why is the Grandma's body just holding on? And one day, and I know this sounds crazy and uncanny, but I mean, this is just the kind of thing you see in medical practice. Is one day, Grandma just sits up, and
it's better.
Yeah, if you've ever seen this, you know what I mean. That she seems somehow more alive than alive. No. And the bystanders all think, well, this means that Grandma gets better.
And the next day she dies.
That's right, and then she just passes away.
I've experienced this myself personally with my own grandmother, actually, Dr. Moody. And you know, I talked about a lot of people, we had talked about that and how that's happened to so many people have had that same experience.
The candle burns.
That is really odd.
It is, because if you know what I'm talking about then, that it seemed that she was more alive than alive, right? It just like she was more vibrant than she was even before she got sick.
Exactly.
You know, I mean, this I don't know if this is related or not, the question, and I think maybe I ought to wait for the caller.
Well, I want to talk about the grief counseling that you do later tonight before the show's over. I also want to talk about some of that stuff that you do. I want to talk about your upcoming events, anything that you've got that you're working on. But we'll get into that too. But I really want to talk about the psychomanium later as well. But right now we've got a caller, and it is who is it? Oh, it is Rich Anders.
Rich Anders, how are you?
Rich, how's it going?
It's going very well. I'm very interested listening to you and Dr. Moody. And to start with, I want to say to Dr. Moody that at the beginning of my journey, I found a lot of very interesting information and help in his books, especially I think it's called Lives After Death. So I want to thank you for him for that, for the help he gave me.
Thank you,
today
sir.
I would like to offer him a little help from my part. He always stops with people who die and come back. And he can find on my website a very interesting article where Princess Diana of Wales, who died, describes her experiences during a time that she was out of body in the operating room before she died, and afterwards she gives a complete account of what happened afterwards and where she went, how dying was, and how life on the other side is for her. And he can find it on my website, richanders.com, under articles Princess Diana of Wales.
Huh. Well, now, how did you access that information?
Well, sir, I'm what you call a telepathist. And if you go on my website, you will see more than 30 contributions of people who talked to me after they died, and they are all they are all household names, and it's not just that they say, "Well, I'm fine," etc. These texts that they give me usually between 10 and 20 pages in the language they used to talk. So, for instance, Princess Diana, the message that she gave me was in the Queen's English. I also talked to Frank Sinatra, who talked his American English.
Don't ask him about Frank Sinatra.
What do you say?
No, I said don't ask him about Frank. Rich actually... Tell him about Frank Sinatra. Rich Anders claims that Frank Sinatra went to hell and that you saved him telepathically. This is correct.
That's correct. Well, he's not the only one. I also got Princess Diana out of hell.
I
Princess
did not
Diana.
know. We've got to talk about this when you come back on in May.
No, I have. See, the thing is that obviously these privileged people, even after death, are privileged. And if you go to my website, you will see reading samples of my book, The End of the World and What. And there are about 30 people. And you know essentially all of them. The most famous is probably President Kennedy and the people of the Kennedy clan. And those are very interesting contributions. And if Dr. Moody agrees to it, I'll be happy to send him the book for free.
Oh, okay.
Well, how nice. Well, thank you, Richard. And I'm going to look at that website because, I just don't know about this. It's something outside of the province of what I have studied. But I also accept that lots of people have experiences that they take to be actually communicating with people on the other side, and who am I to say any different? I mean, I've looked at this from a slightly different approach based on the ancient Greeks who had these institutions called oracles of the dead, or psychomantions, where people would go and have experiences which they literally interpreted to be actually communicating with the spirits of their departed loved ones.
Very interesting.
Well, in fact, I can, if you are interested, I can teach you how that is done, and maybe you learn how to do it. I have several people.
Richard, well, I appreciate that, but I tell you the truth, I have trouble enough communicating with the living people I got now. You know what I'm talking about? I'm still working on that side of it.
Oh, Rich, thank you for calling.
Thanks, Rich.
We're, just to let you know, though, I did get your email about the Jesus, the Jesus, Jesus Christ guy, and I'll send you a response to that later. I don't think I'm going to have him on. I might beat him up too bad, and he might run home crying back to Texas or wherever he's from. But thanks for calling, Rich.
I think you should have him on, but it's your decision.
All right, well, we'll talk later, okay?
Can you get the address from Dr. Moody where I can send him this information that we just talked about?
Sure, I can. I'll talk to him about that after the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
Send me an email, and I'm going to send him the book.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you so much,
Thanks, Rich.
Have fun.
All right. All right, that was Rich Anders from, I think he's in Georgia now, isn't he?
Yeah, he is, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was the first guest I've ever called an Antichrist on my show. We laugh about that all the time. Real nice guy.
Yeah. I had a question somewhere. Okay, I remember what it was.
Okay.
Through all these experiences that you've talked to these people and interviewed them and discussed their near-death experiences, I mean, has there ever been a point where these people, they go through the light and they see their life flash before their eyes while they're clinically dead, I guess? Is there a point where they ever speak about having to make a choice?
Yes.
Do you come with me or go back?
About that, and that's there seems to be at least three patterns of how people conceptualize or think about their return. Some of them say that they have no idea how they got back. At one moment it seemed they were in this light, and the next moment they were back in their physical bodies feeling the pain and so on, with no sense of the transition between those two things.
Okay.
There's another group who say that they were told that they had to go back, that they had something left to do. And it's interesting that they're never told what it is that they have to do, but just they're told there's something that they have left to complete, and they've got to go back. And incidentally, in the passage of years, I've known a few people that I kept in contact with over the years who initially when they came back, had no idea what it was that they were supposed to come back for, but in the intervening years finally did, in retrospect, figure out what it was that they came back for. But the third group are those that you mentioned, and these are the people who tell us that they were given a choice, that they could either go on with this experience that they were having then, or else that they could go back to the life that they have been leading. And if you think about it for a minute, I guess it's pretty plain that the ones that I talked with who were given that choice chose to come back. And
obviously.
And when they did, though, it's really interesting that almost always it's the same thing, and that is that they tell us that for themselves they would rather have stayed in the light, but they choose to come back because they have young children left to raise. And the exceptions to this are people, for example, who have been training for a helping profession, and a nurse or a doctor or social worker, and that at this crisis event in their life they are given this choice and they choose to come back because they want to go back to continue their helping profession.
No,
but it's always for someone else that they choose to come back.
Yeah. It's a selfless kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, this we've got a repeat question. What about hell? Any of these people ever had a bad experience? In the chat room, we did answer that earlier. The answer is yes. Some people thought they were in hell, I guess. But you listen to the podcast next week. The thing is, though, what I did want to ask about was, you know, you see all these experiences, all these things coming together, and it makes you wonder also about things that they come back with. I know Dan and Brinkley, being one of the people you did interview, he claimed to have this ability to, these special powers that he came back with, the psychic abilities. Do you see this in a lot of people?
A lot of people say that they feel that after they come back, they are more attuned to other people. The first person I heard this from was a woman named Frances Stokes in Macon, Georgia, a long, long time ago, back in 72 or 73, who said to me that she worked for a physician there in Macon, and she told me that after this experience, when, for example, she would get on the elevator with someone, that she could sort of sense what was going on with them in their lives, and could feel people's sadness and so on. But incidentally, this does not necessarily imply that this is some sort of psychic ability, in the sense that empathy is really kind of the characteristic that's usually portrayed here. Not so much that people suddenly have an ability to read minds, but rather that they can they're just more aware of what other people are feeling.
Yeah, it seems to make sense. I mean, you have such a amazing experience like that, and I mean, in a certain way, you sort of tap into a level of your conscious that you've never been involved in.
It makes perfect sense, I think, that if you have an experience in which you review your life, and that you relive each event from the perspective that how that action of yours affected other people's feelings, then that must transform you in a way that makes you more sensitive to how other people are feeling on a day-to-day basis. It just seems to me that makes sense not from the point of view of psychic powers, but just from the point of view of general human empathy.
Well, let me ask you a more medical question. Like I said, once again, I'm not a doctor. But you talk about people, I've heard this, and I don't know if this is just one of those things, you get it a lot, especially with law. I always get the people saying, well, if the state trooper writes you a ticket and he don't have his hat on, that means it ain't going to go through, right? I'm like, I don't know who come up with this, because it's so wrong. Yes, the ticket, for the last time, the ticket's still good. The judge don't care if the guy had his hat on or not. But But my question is this, and maybe this is one of those things. It's been passed around for a long time. People saying we only use 10% of our brains or something like that.
Yeah, and it definitely has. Let me tell you that. That is such a myth. It even got into one of my books, to my horror, because the editor just put it in there. But that is just an absolute myth. And what in the name of God does it mean, right?
Yeah, because I was going to say if...
10% of what?
We only use 10% of our... that's just...
I was going to follow that through.
Absurd.
Well, I was going to follow that through to say that if this is the case, then could this experience trigger this something that allows them to use more of their brain that they're not?
Yeah.
But obviously, that's a bad question.
But how can you measure? I don't know.
Yeah, I just don't know. I just don't know. But one interesting line on that's very rare. Now, out of the thousands of people I've talked with, I only know of about 5 cases of this. But in rare instances, going through this seems to open up the creative side of people's minds. And about 5 cases I know of people who, before they had this experience, had absolutely zero interest in art and absolutely zero talent for it, come back from this and start painting. And one woman I met in Toronto who had this experience started painting and was an award-winning artist there in Canada. So I would say that it definitely, in rare individuals, it does seem to jostle some part of the mind that perhaps they had not used before.
Okay, we've got a caller for you, Dr. Moody. This is Dale from upstate New York. Dale, how's it going?
Good. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great.
Fantastic.
Tell Chuck I said hi.
Okay.
We will.
We'll do. Chuck says thanks.
He's counting money right now.
Yeah.
So he's a little bit busy. Anyway,
go ahead.
Dr. Moody, I read your book many, many years ago, and I found it fascinating.
Thank you.
And a few months back, I spoke to Daniel Brinkley.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and I'm not going to go into details of how this was set up, but we were discussing several things, and I had mentioned to him that the state of the world is pretty messed up, and I had a feeling that things are going to get tough for everybody, not just Americans, but everybody, and what he thought about how to deal with that. And his response was, well, what's the worst that can happen? You'll die. He goes, big deal.
Wow.
He has no fear of death. He's not worried about it. And I think the work you're doing is helping to eliminate that fear of death, because we live in a world of fear. Everything is driven by fear.
Yep.
And I really appreciate the work that you've done, and I really like the things that Daniel Brinkley's doing, and I hope that, hey, Jay, that you could get him on your show someday if he's not too busy.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, we'll work on it.
I'll try to contact him, definitely.
Okay, I'm all done.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much for calling, Dale.
Thanks, Dale.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. All right.
probably
What is wrong with our phones?
I don't know.
Do you hear this? Do you hear this real deep buzz, Dr. Moody?
Nope, I don't hear a buzzing.
Okay, well.
So the only people that are hearing it is us. Oh, and the people listening. Okay. Oh, great.
That's
all right.
good.
Well, as long as you're not hearing, as long as you can understand the questions, right? We got to get that thing fixed. I'm going to have to call somebody. I hate doing that. All right.
It's break time, Scott.
So yeah, well, let me ask one real quick question, then we'll go to break, because I want to save the last part to talk about some of the grief counseling that Dr. Moody does, as well as the psychomanium. But the question is that, as he alluded to, do you find, Dr. Moody, that most people, like Daniel Brinkley, when they come back from this experience, have no fear of death?
Absolutely. This is something I've heard from the very beginning. George Ritchie, I remember telling me this in 1965, and I've heard it from thousands of people since then, that this experience does pretty much eliminate your fear of death. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't try to get out of the way of an oncoming automobile, or that you relish the idea of dying in a painful or unpleasant way. And that people who come back from this experience, they have a new kind of will to live in many cases, to be helpful to other people. But they also tell us that they really don't have any more fear of death because their experience to them completely convinces them that what we call death is a transition into some other reality.
Okay, and with that, we're gonna take our last break of the night. Call us here, 877-722-7382. That's 877-SCARE-U2. That's toll-free in the United States and Canada. And or locally, 336-996-1596. I don't know what you Brits and you other guys across the pond, I don't know how that works. You've called before. I don't know if you call Sprint or whoever's over there, Ma Europe or whatever it is. But anyway, just give us a call here and speak live with Dr. Raymond Moody. We'll be right back after this.
Are you fascinated by the possibility of extraterrestrial existence? Do you read, collect, or look for anything that involves UFOs? Look no further than theUFOstore.com. This website has the largest selection of UFO products on the internet. Log on to theUFOstore.com and you'll find over 100 video documentaries and DVDs. Register to receive the UFO Store's free newsletter. Log on to www.theUFOstore.com and experience the universe of UFOs.
And we're back. World of the Unexplained, last half hour, guys. The numbers are 1-877-722-7382, 1-877-SCARE-U2, 336-996-1596 is the local number. Come on, guys, give us a call. Dr. Raymond Moody. And right now we have a call from Brooklyn, New York. It is, gosh, I hope I say this name right. Saritzi? Hello. You're on World of the Unexplained.
Okay, great.
Right here.
How's it going?
What's going on? I don't know if you guys remember me.
Of course we remember you. We remember you're our only guy from Brooklyn. So
yeah,
no sleep till Brooklyn, brother. We got you. No, anyway, all right.
Pretty good. What's up? What's going on, guys?
Not much.
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good.
What's your?
Well, I just wanted to say, give my 2 cents on this because I have some experiences that made me, basically started me on the journey that I'm on and learning about this stuff. And for me, there was 2 things. One in the very recent years, but another when I was a little kid. I had this Deja Vu Dream, basically. And it was a simple dream. And it was about, I just saw, I was in a line or something, and there were people in front of me, and I was looking down. And when I got to the head of the line, I saw black shoes and legs, like stilettos. And I looked up, and this hand gave me an orange, and I took it. And that was the end of the dream. So the next day, I went on this, school trip as a little kid, and I was in this line. And, I didn't know what was going on, until I saw the shoes, which shocked me. The same shoes, I didn't know where I saw them before at the time, but as I looked up, I got the orange, and I freaked out, And so that was my first experience with Deja Vu. Not necessarily directly, relating to this topic specifically, but, this kind of, you'd say psychic experience. And anyway, recently what happened to me, it's been happening to me, I kind of forced it to stop, is like I had these things where my brain would vibrate. Like literally like a nut in a shell.
Your brain would actually vibrate?
Vibrate, vibrate. And my, the thing that triggered it the first time is that I was, playing around, meditating, and I was trying to see if I could, at least I didn't realize I was trying to have an out-of-body experience. I was just trying to have an experience. And I was thinking about just like something arbitrary, like the one person in the world that's like meant for me, and this picture of a woman came into my head. And, it's like my spirit immediately, when I saw the picture of this person, it like left my body and went to go look for her. Like, it was scary. Like, it felt like I just went, it's like I was in a tunnel, and my spirit just leapt out my body and just went down this tunnel looking for this. And basically, it was almost like my spirit had a rope around it, and I was pulling it back, like, "Hey, whoa, what the hell are you doing?"
Now, were you doing any hallucinatory drugs at this point in time?
No, I wasn't doing anything.
Really? And this
nothing at all.
Meditation.
Just meditation.
And the thing about the vibrating is that my brain is like, what would happen is if I let it go on for just a couple of seconds, my whole vision would go totally white. And, it was scary for me, so I didn't allow it to continue.
Is this medically possible, Dr. Moody?
Well, let me just finish.
I do know this much, that out-of-body experiences are quite common even outside of the context of near-death experiences. That is, you don't have to almost die to have an out-of-body experience. It can be brought on by a variety of other things. Sometimes, for example, astronomers who are looking through their telescopes suddenly will report that, will suddenly experience getting out of their bodies and looking at their own bodies as they're standing there at their telescopes. Or performers who are singing beautiful music on stage, for example, will have an experience of seeming to leave their body during that time. Eric Pagani, who's a well-known French concert pianist, for example, had this experience while he was playing a concert that that he felt that he left his body and entered into this light. And very often when people have these out-of-body experiences, they relate this vibration that the caller is reporting, where people say that it's almost like an electric shock sensation, or almost like a buzz or a vibration that they feel just at the point before they leave their bodies. So yes, it's definitely possible to have an out-of-body experience in other conditions than being close to death.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah. That's what made me feel like, this is definitely real. It's actually something I used to be able to do at will since I started to do it, but for several months now I haven't allowed myself to do that because, obviously it's kind of scary.
Yeah. I could imagine.
So
you could be driving a car, for example, and well, there you
It
go.
wouldn't happen like that. I'd actually have to be sitting down on a bed and meditate a little bit and allow it to happen.
I see.
But now, because I haven't done it, it's like I got rusty, and I'm not able to do it at will. But in the past, when I've been like that, I just have to practice, and it comes back.
Okay.
Wow.
But I don't know what I don't know. Hopefully, I was hoping you'd be able to tell me a little more. But I guess it sounds like he knows about it, so it's cool.
Okay.
Oh, another detail you mentioned, that feeling of when you come back into your body, almost like you've been connected to it by a cord or like a spring. I hear this from people all the time too, that when they go back into their body, it's kind of like they're drawn back into it by a cord or snapped back into it by a spring almost.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean that literally though, but it's what that was like my attitude, pulling myself back in. It's like
There's that connection and the almost like the magnetism almost that brings you back in.
Yeah.
Oh, you have anything else to add?
That's it.
Okay, man.
Thanks for calling.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thanks.
Take it easy.
All right, you too.
Gosh,
wow, that's pretty crazy, man.
All right, I got 15 minutes left, and I know Josh is going to kill me if I don't ask. What is the psychomanium? What have you done with it? I noticed on your webpage that it says coming soon. Dr. Moody, help me out here. I know nothing about the psychomanium.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I mentioned earlier that the way I got into this whole field at the beginning was through my interest in Plato.
Yeah.
And you probably remember that Socrates was executed, but he says, for dealing with things under the earth and up in the air.
Yes.
And what this had to do with is that the average Greek of Plato and Socrates' time thought that what a philosopher was a person who called up the spirits of the deceased. And the playwright Aristophanes, for example, in his play The Birds, accused Socrates of being involved in this activity of calling up the spirits of the deceased. And this was practiced at the institution known as the Oracle of the Dead. If you've read the Odyssey, for example, of Homer, you remember that in Book 11, Odysseus goes up to this place where they called up the spirits. Herodotus, the historian, mentions this and so on. So this institution, the Oracle of the Dead, was very important in the development of Western philosophy and the origins of the Western way of thinking. And so the oracles of the dead were something that had interested me even in college. And in the mid-'80s...
I wrote a paper on that in college, actually.
I'm sorry?
I said I wrote a paper on that in college, actually, the Greek way of death. I did a whole little series for that ancient Greek class. You remember Kircher used to teach it? Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry.
Great, yeah. And I really got fascinated by that stuff in college, too. And back in about 85, I read an article in a classical journal about how the most famous of these oracles of the dead had actually been rediscovered exactly where Herodotus and Homer and many other writers said that it was. And when they excavated it, what they found was a huge underground facility. They apparently kept people down there for 29 days in darkness and the dormitory rooms and so on. And on the 29th day, they entered into a hallway, a subterranean hallway about 50 feet long, where they saw the apparitions of the deceased. And at the end of the hallway, what the archaeologists found was an enormous bronze cauldron that was surrounded by a banister, indicating that when people saw the visions of the deceased, they were encircling this cauldron. And so from studying what the archaeologists found in this excavation, I was able to come up with a very plausible psychological explanation of how they did it, because I knew from my work in psychiatry that that you can, for example, polish the inside of a silver bowl and fill it up with olive oil, and in a darkened room by candlelight, many people under those circumstances will see full-color, moving, three-dimensional visions. So it was just a matter then of setting that situation up. In about 1990, I created a room in my research facility where it has a mirror on the wall, but it's surrounded by a black cloth that and so that when the person's sitting in that room looking up into the mirror and not seeing their own reflections, but under dim illumination, all they see is like an infinite depth, like it goes away into infinity. And when you prepare people by getting them to talk about a person that they want to see again who has died, and they go through a long process of reminiscing and talking about the person and talking about the strong points of the relationship and of the difficulties in the relationship and so on. It's an extended process. But then at the end of this process, when people actually go into that room and gaze into the optical depth created by the mirror, many people under those circumstances, actually about a half of them, do have experiences in which they actually seem, from their point of view, to be communicating with the deceased people. They see three-dimensional visions of the deceased. Sometimes the visions actually seem to come out of the mirror and come into the room where they are. About a third of the people say that in addition to seeing the vision, they actually seem to hear the voice of the deceased quite loud. And almost all of them who do not actually hear a voice nonetheless say that they have a heart-to-heart or mind-to-mind communication with the person who had died. So, and incidentally, that result, which I achieved from my study, has now been reproduced by many others. For example, at the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Palo Alto, California, about 12 or 13 years ago, they sent a team out here to my place to learn how to do that, and they took it back to the ITP, and now they teach their psychotherapy students how to do this as a working with it as a therapeutic modality for grief. Because it really does seem, when people have this experience, whether or not it's real or not, or whatever real may mean in this context, we just don't know.
Right. Well, you know, this I have seen this at work before. Actually, I was with Joshua P. Warren, whose show you were on not too long ago, speaking of strange.
Yep.
And we were together in the Bynum House. This is up in Asheville, North Carolina. It was near the, what's the name of that hotel, guys? Grove Park Inn.
Grove Park Inn.
Oh,
yep.
yeah.
And this was a property that they don't let just anybody into. We got special permission, and we were in there overnight. And they went downstairs, and they set up this, they had a mirror there in this dark room, and they had I can't remember if it was a candle or a flashlight, whatever, but they had a fan going in the corner as well. And
that's a good point, because that gives a white noise. And
exactly.
That's right.
And I wouldn't go in there. I'm not stupid. So, I'm, and I don't know. I mean, doesn't this open up some ideas about maybe you're playing with something you shouldn't? I mean, kind of like the whole Ouija board
thing. Well,
know
something? At the same time, I mean, people have said that for as long as there have been human beings who, whatever new subject that comes along that anybody can investigate, there are always people who say that we're opening up things we shouldn't. And, I mean, this is just part and parcel of being a human being, in my opinion. And this is something that the Greeks did for thousands of years. It was even a folk custom in the southern United States up until about 100 years ago. So, I mean, to me, it's just the idea that God is itching to get us for gazing into a mirror. I mean, I think this not very realistic.
Well, now so the psychomantium is you're gonna. I'm assuming you're gonna post more of this on your website. Let me go ahead and give people your website address too, because I want people to definitely visit it. So you use this as part of your grief counseling in your practice?
Well, I would say this, that what I do is that I teach this to people. Okay. I mean, most of the people who come here to learn about this are psychotherapists and so on who want to use it in their own practice, but I am not a therapist. The way I'm a teacher, and what I do with this is that I teach people about the history of it and show them the setup, and I think that what I'm looking for is not people who want to come here to have some sort of experience, but rather who are interested in this as a historical and psychological phenomenon. But yes, in fact, I mean, it has just happened that even if people go into this out of curiosity or curiosity about how the human mind works or whatever, that they do say that, that afterward, even if they hadn't been experiencing any grief issues with the person that they set out to see, that it does bring about a kind of healing experience and an alleviation of the grief. But that's not really my focus on it. My focus is that this is something that is has been in our human nature for tens of thousands of years, and I explore it from that sort of perspective, and its relevance to the origin of Western thought through the early Greek philosophers.
Right. Okay, I'm going to give your website address real quick. It's www.lifeafterlife.com, and I'm going to give you the last word, even though I really, really wanted to talk about Scott Peck's last book before he passed. I'll get to that next time. I'll give you the last word, Dr. Moody. Thank you once again for being on our show. Wrap it up any way you see fit.
Well, just thank you so much, you guys. This has been really fun, and you guys are so easy to talk with, and this is
not
great.
Usually.
Thank you so much.
And we're not usually easy to talk with. It depends on who you are, I guess. Thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
Absolutely.
Take care.
Hope I'll talk with you again.
Definitely will.
Absolutely.
Great.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
All right, that was Dr. Raymond Moody. You can see his website at www.lifeafterlife.com.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I should start the music. You know, when we were talking about Greek, I mean, they're talking about a lot about Greek philosophers and the Greeks, and that was really interesting. I should have gotten what journal he got that from, because I would like to read it. Anyway.
I'll ask him.
Yeah, that's true. But you guys ought to go out and see the movie 300. It's awesome. It's really, really, really awesome in like so many different ways. And maybe
it involves us kicking Muslims down.
No, it does. No, actually, it doesn't. It's the Spartan battle at Thermopylae.
They're the Muslims now.
Anyway,
they're
not,
are. That's where they came from.
No, that'd be like Zoroastrians or something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, but it's a great movie. The way it's filmed and the design and layout of the film is really visually impressive. It's very violent, yeah. So
that's why Trent enjoyed it.
Well, it's about a battle, and it's very historically cool. You know, there's a lot of lines that they pull from historical context. They're actually in the film, and I really appreciate that. Much unlike Alexander and Troy, which were far subpar. That was.
No, Troy wasn't that bad of a film. You just didn't like it because Brad Pitt was in it.
I think. Well, I mean, it was okay. I enjoyed it, but I mean, 300 just it's better than anything.
Ain't no Fight Club, I know. But
well, yeah. Yeah, it's a Frank Miller graphic novel. I didn't realize that at the time.
What's a Frank Miller graphic novel?
300.
Really, I didn't know that.
It's a derivation of the Battle of Thermopylae. But it's really, really cool, and you guys ought to watch it. And it has nothing to do with World Unexplained or anything. I just thought I'd share that with everybody. Oh,
Out of Darkness Tour.
That's right. www.outofdarknesstour.com.
Come on, guys. We've sold a few tickets. We need to sell more.
Yep.
April 30th is the cutoff date. At this point in time, we're not going to be able to have this if you guys don't buy a ticket.
Yep, that's true.
And we want to have it, we don't want to disappoint you guys that have already bought tickets because we want to have this thing. I'm waiting for the tax returns, man. What
just
all
a
of
small
our listeners
investment.
Are late filers.
A small investment for such a deal that you guys get. So many.
I know Greensboro's a long way for some of you guys.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, these are big names. You know what I mean? And,
huge.
And we're getting them there, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
It is. It's going to be great.
So check it out. Buy a ticket.
And it's only $50 for the whole day. But we know you're going to want to stay and have dinner with us. $75. And like I said, we're not making any money on this thing, really. Yeah. We're just trying to make enough money to fly John out, to fly Bill out, to be able to pay for your wonderful dinner, to be able to pay for the wonderful conference that we're having.
I mean,
to rent this conference space. I mean, if we could do it for free, we would.
I know. If Chuck were really counting money in the back, then we wouldn't even charge for it.
We wouldn't even be talking about this.
Okay. Yeah, double character.
Yeah.
Shady.
All right.
Barry White.
Barry, we're the Senator Barry White. There we go.
Yeah, we know about you now.
Angela
Moore's opened our eyes about you, Chuck. Anyway,
Barry White.
All right, I guess
this is Jay Scott, your only JD DJ on many, many places. Did you like that? No. It died with me. The music died.
The music died with you.
It's coming back?
Yeah.
It comes back?
Uh-huh.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it does. We just sit here and wait.
I did. Okay.
And that's what I'm going to say. This is Trent Lackey. We're coming to you from Kernersville, North Carolina, where, as always, it's a small town, but yet we still talk about very big things. Okay.
Chuck, we out!